The voice came at 3:12 a.m., soft, shaking, as if it wasn't supposed to be heard. "If you're listening, I need you to understand. I didn't mean for her to scream." The words flickered through static, riding the back of a low, rhythmic pulse. A breath. A sob. Then a sequence of numbers. 4, 9, 3, 0, 2. The man, mid-40s, unshaven and sleepless, sat hunched over the radio. His fingers trembled near the dial, not touching it, afraid that turning it would break whatever fragile truth had slipped through. There was something wrong with the frequency. The numbers weren't random. They felt intentional, surgical. The scream that followed didn't sound like interference. It sounded like a girl dying in a metal box 100 feet below ground. He didn't flinch. He just whispered, "I thought it was broken." The silence that came next was heavier than the scream. He hadn't slept in 3 days. Maybe 4. Time had stopped making sense when the radio started whispering back. The girl's voice never said her name, but it felt like she knew his. "Stop turning it off," she had said. "I'm only real when you listen." He told himself it was a dream, but he couldn't explain how she knew the numbers he'd written in his sleep, or why the scream always happened after he questioned his memory. When the power went out last night, the radio stayed on. That was when he started locking the door, not to keep someone out, but to keep something in. He sat now in that dim apartment, a prisoner of his own obsession, staring into the dim face of a radio that sounded like it knew him better than anyone alive ever had. He first found the radio at a garage sale no one else remembered. Rain was falling sideways, and the woman who sold it didn't speak. She only pointed at it, then at him. It looked too old to work, but it turned on without being plugged in. The voice came the first night. "Do you remember what you did in the basement?" it asked. He didn't have a basement. Not one he used. The memory hit like a body under ice, silent, distant, waiting. He took the radio home because it called to something he didn't know was broken in him. That first scream on the frequency didn't scare him. It made him feel seen. The numbers weren't random. He figured that out after the third night. They matched old police files, dates of disappearances, child abductions, places he swore he'd never heard of. But the worst part? Some of them matched his own journal entries from years ago. And I had wanted portraits of those places he went alone. Towns he drove through but never stopped in. He found receipts in his glove box from cities he didn't remember visiting. And every time he turned the dial, more numbers came. He didn't want to decode them. He was afraid of what he might find. He called the police once. Tried to explain. "There's a girl. She's trapped. I hear her scream at 3:12 a.m. every night." They told him to stop wasting time. They sent an officer once, young, nervous, didn't even come inside. Just stood outside, asked a few questions and left. That night, the scream didn't stop. It kept going. 5 minutes. 10. Then, silence. The next morning, the radio broadcasted a single line. "The one who could help is gone." He saw the officer's picture on the news 3 days later. Missing. He stopped speaking to people. Not out of fear, but because they started echoing things the radio said. A neighbor asked, "You ever go back to Camden Hill?" That name didn't mean anything. Until the next broadcast whispered, "Camden Hill, mile marker 61, she's still cold." The man stood frozen in the hallway, the word echoing like a curse that had followed him home. He searched online. A girl had vanished there 10 years ago. No suspects. No witnesses. He checked the date, March 2nd, 2015. Then looked at his old tax records. Hotel. Gas dot. Toll receipt. All dated March 2nd, 2015. He went to Camden Hill the night she disappeared, and he had no memory of it. He started tearing his apartment apart, looking for something, anything, to prove he wasn't losing his mind. But every drawer felt like a confession. He found it behind the bookshelf, a crumpled receipt from a gas station, offered 5, dated the same day as the disappearance. Scrawled on the back, in his own handwriting, were the numbers 49,302 and the word cellar. The same numbers the radio whispered on the first night. He stood there shaking, staring at it like it might burn through his palm. He didn't remember writing it, but the handwriting was his. He started pulling more books from the shelf, and behind them were maps, photographs, some of a forest, some of a cabin. One had a circle drawn in red ink over a wooded trail labeled Old Quarry Path. In another photo, a girl stood beside a mailbox. He dropped the photos, heart pounding. The mailbox had his name on it. He didn't own any property in the woods. At least he thought he didn't. He tried to call someone. Not for help, just for clarity. His sister answered. They hadn't spoken in years. "Do you remember Camden Hill?" he asked. Silence. "Then you promised we'd never talk about it again." Her voice cracked. "I told you not to go back." She hung up. He stared at the dial tone. The girl's scream played in his head, even with the radio off. He walked to the bathroom, splashed water on his face. When he looked up, the mirror was fogged. He hadn't used hot water. A single word was written across the glass. "Why?" He backed away. His reflection didn't move. It just stared at him, waiting for an answer he didn't have. He dug through old storage boxes, hoping to disprove everything. One box held journals from when he was 16. The handwriting was rushed, erratic. One entry read, "She followed me. I told her to stop. I locked the door." No name. No details. But the date was circled, March 2nd. Again. The air in the room felt tighter. His ears rang. He dropped the journal and stepped back. On the wall beside him, the radio flickered to life without being touched. A voice whispered, "She trusted you." Then silence. The man sank to the floor. His hands covered his ears, but the voice wasn't in the room. It was inside him, coiled deep where memory and denial touched. That night, the broadcast changed. It didn't start with numbers. It started with breathing. Labored. Wet. Then a girl's voice, closer than before. "I waited," she said. "I waited for you to come back." He sat motionless, tears running down his face. The room felt full, like someone else was there. Then the static broke. "Why did you leave me there?" He whispered. "I didn't know." But he wasn't sure if that was true. Not anymore. He remembered stairs. A door with a rusted lock. A voice begging. His own voice screaming back, "Stay down there." The scream that followed wasn't just fear. It was betrayal. And he finally understood. It wasn't the radio calling for help. It was memory clawing its way out. He stopped trying to prove the radio was haunted. Now he was trying to prove he wasn't. But everything in the apartment, every object, every receipt, every memory, begged otherwise. The photos were the worst. Ones he didn't remember taking. The girl. Always the same girl. Sometimes smiling. Sometimes crying. One showed her tied to a chair in a dim basement. Another, him standing behind her, expression unreadable. He tore them apart, burned them in the sink. But that night they returned, neatly stacked on his kitchen table. A note rested on top. In handwriting that matched his own it read, "You made me remember. Now I'll help you forget." The radio crackled to life, and for the first time his own voice came through it, whispering, "Don't listen. Don't trust me." He drove to Camden Hill before sunrise. The forest was darker than it should have been, as if light refused to linger. He followed a dirt trail he didn't recognize, but somehow knew by heart. The air felt thick. Familiar. Wall. The path led to a collapsed cabin, half swallowed by trees. He stepped inside, flashlight trembling. The floorboards groaned, and beneath them, chains. Rusted, coiled, and broken. And then, something else. A child's drawing taped to a wall. Stick figures. One small, one tall. The small one had red ink for eyes. Above it, a scrawled title, Bad Guy House. His stomach turned. The girl hadn't been a stranger. She'd known him, trusted him, and he had forgotten all of it. Inside the cabin, he found a trapdoor. His hands shook as he opened it. The steps led to a basement choked in mildew and rot. He descended with slow, deliberate dread. The air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, a rusted bed frame, a bucket and claw marks on the cement. On the far wall, a name was scratched over and over again. Maya. He fell to his knees. The name didn't just sound familiar. It shattered something in him. He remembered a promise. A voice crying, "You said I could go home." He had been the one to lock the door, to walk away. Not in rage, not in fear, in choice. The radio didn't lie. He had. He drove home in silence. The radio stayed quiet. Too quiet. That night, when he turned it on, nothing happened. No numbers. No screams. Just the faint sound of water dripping, somewhere far away. He waited for hours. Then, the girl's voice returned, whispering, "It's not over. You still have something of mine." He looked down. The same photograph, the one he burned, was back in his hand, unscorched. His reflection in the window moved slightly out of sync. He wasn't sure which version of him was real anymore. Was he the man who tried to forget? Or the one who never wanted to remember? And which one deserved to be heard? He replayed the last recording from the radio, slowed it down, removed the static. It wasn't one voice. It was two. The girl's and his, speaking in rhythm, like a conversation, a confession. "I'm sorry," he heard himself say. "I was scared." The girl replied, "You left me." Then silence. Then singing. A lullaby. One his mother used to hum when he was small. He hadn't heard it in years. But Maya had. And she'd remembered. He sank into the floor. The lullaby still playing through the static, wrapping around him like a noose made of memory. There was no undoing what was done. But maybe there was one thing left he could still do. He stood, took a breath, and dialed a number on the radio frequency. "I'm coming back," he whispered. The call connected, not to a person, but to a voicemail box. A woman's voice answered, calm but distant. "You shouldn't have come back." Then, silence. Confused, the man scoured the internet for every record of Maya's disappearance. That's when he saw it. An old news article from a decade ago. Local girl missing. Camden Hill tragedy. The photo was blurred but unmistakable. A second headline flashed below. Suspect's last known location. His own home. The suspect wasn't some stranger. It was him. Not just a man who forgot. A man who chose. The story shattered everything he believed. She was never missing. He had hidden her. Buried the truth deep, even from himself. He confronted his sister. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes filled with pain. "Because you weren't ready. You promised you'd never speak of Maya. We tried to protect you." She revealed a hidden family secret. Maya wasn't just his sister, but a child they had all tried to forget. The man was the one who locked her away after a terrible accident he couldn't face. "She never left," she said. "You gave her away to the darkness, hoping it would silence the screams." For years, the family had been broken by silence. Now, the radio was forcing the truth to the surface. It wasn't just a device, it was a reckoning. Back alone, the man listened to the radio with new understanding. The numbers weren't just codes, they were memories encoded in pain and guilt. Each scream was a fragment of Maya's trapped voice. The radio was his mind unraveling, his conscience demanding justice. He whispered into the static, "I'm sorry." And the voice answered, not with anger, but with a fragile hope. "Come find me." The line between past and present blurred. He wasn't running from memory anymore. He was chasing it, searching for a way to make amends or face final judgment. In the dead of night, the man returned to the forest, not as a lost soul, but as a seeker. The cold bit into his skin, but he pressed on, following the radio's fractured melody. The trail led him to a rusted metal gate, half buried in snow. Beyond it, the remains of a dilapidated cabin waited silently. As he stepped inside, the air shifted, a mixture of sorrow and acceptance. He found a small box on the floor, wrapped in dust and cobwebs. Inside, a faded locket, a worn photograph, and a folded letter addressed to him. He unfolded it with trembling hands. The words inside were simple, but their weight crushed him. "I forgive you." He read the letter again, each word a fracture and a balm. The past couldn't be undone, but maybe it could be carried differently. The radio crackled softly, one last time, whispering Maya's name, not as a scream but as a farewell. The man folded the letter carefully, tucked the locket around his neck, and stepped outside. The sun rose slowly, casting pale light over the trees. He knew some wounds would never heal, but the truth was no longer buried. It was a silent, aching hope, fragile but real. And with that, he turned away from the cabin, leaving behind the shadows and the screams. The confrontation came like a storm breaking through years of silence. Back in his apartment, the man faced his sister again, this time with the box from the cabin between them. "Why didn't you stop me?" he demanded, voice raw with years of guilt and fury. She looked away, tears falling. "Because you needed to remember, not just me, but yourself." The air was thick with unsaid things, the love, the anger, the blame. He screamed what he'd never dared. "You left her to rot in the dark." Her reply was a whisper. "We all did." The fragile family cracked open, bled raw. Trust was shattered. Only truth remained, sharp and bleeding. That night, the man sat by the radio, the locket cold against his chest. His hands trembled as static gave way to a voice, no longer distant or broken, but clear, fragile, alive. "I forgive you," Maya whispered. "But you must forgive yourself." The scream returned briefly, then faded into a lullaby, the same one his mother sang long ago. His tears fell freely, each one a small surrender and a silent plea for redemption. He realized the scream was never about blame, it was a call for release. And in the echo of that final note, he felt the first breath of peace. The next morning, he called the police again. This time, his voice was steady, bare of excuses. He told them everything: the cabin, the box, the letters, and the voices. They listened. They came with search teams, breaking the silence that had wrapped his life in shadow for so long. Evidence was found: bones beneath the cabin floor, relics of a story too long hidden. The man watched as the truth was unearthed, not for himself but for Maya. The weight of years pressed down, but so did something lighter, a fragile hope that justice might finally come, even if too late. He visited his mother's grave the following week. The wind was cold, scattering fallen leaves at his feet. He spoke aloud for the first time in years. "I'm sorry for everything, for not hearing her scream sooner." The silence that answered was vast and final. Yet beneath the sorrow, a thread of clarity ran deep. His path wasn't toward forgiveness from the past, but acceptance of it. His mother's voice in his memory hummed softly, a lullaby unfinished but never forgotten. He laid the locket on the grave and walked away, lighter but not whole. Some wounds marked the soul forever. That night, back in the apartment, the radio went silent. No numbers. No screams. No static. Just the quiet hum of electricity. He reached out and turned it off. A final act of surrender and control. He didn't feel victory. He didn't feel peace. Just the fragile knowledge that some stories never truly end. The locket lay beside the radio, a quiet testament to love and loss. He exhaled slowly, the weight of truth settling deep inside him. In the silence, he knew the cost of facing what was hidden. and that some ghosts never truly leave. The apartment felt emptier than ever, stripped of the frantic energy that had once pulsed through every corner. Now, silence stretched like a thick fog, heavy with absence. He moved slowly, almost mechanically, running his fingers along the worn surfaces, searching for a trace of something to fill the void. The news had broadcast the story. Maya's remains found, arrests made, the case closed. But closure was a distant word, one that rang hollow in his ears. Justice had come, but it hadn't healed the fractures in his soul. He lit a single candle on the windowsill, watching its flickering flame cast fragile shadows. The radio sat cold, silent, a relic of pain and memory. He understood now, some truths don't offer peace. They only ask you to live with their cost, day after endless day. In the following days, he began visiting places Maya once loved, places he'd never allowed himself to remember or see. The playground where her laughter had once filled the air was silent now, the swings swaying slowly in the wind. The old oak tree they had climbed together stood bare, its branches stretching skeletal against the gray sky. Each place whispered fragments of a past long buried, but never erased. Strangers passed by, unaware of the weight carried by the man standing there, hands clenched, eyes downcast. The memories didn't fade, they transformed. They ceased to be chains and became scars, marks of survival. For the first time he felt that carrying Maya within him wasn't a burden, but a fragile, enduring part of himself, an echo of love amid loss. Nights were the hardest. He still heard faint echoes, soft, distant whispers that floated through cracked windows and restless dreams. But the voices no longer haunted him. Instead they comforted like a fragile lullaby. The past wasn't erased, but gently folded into his present, a quiet companion rather than a relentless tormentor. Slowly, he found himself writing again, pen moving across paper like a lifeline cast into a stormy sea. Each page was a small step forward, a way to remember without drowning in guilt. The radio was gone now, sold or given away, but the numbers and screams remained, living in the silences between words and the spaces he filled with meaning. He learned to listen differently, to carry memory without letting it consume him. Slowly, connections began to rebuild. Friends he had pushed away reached out hesitantly, unsure if the man they once knew was still inside the man shaped by grief and guilt. He responded with quiet nods, cautious smiles that spoke of tentative trust. Bridges had been burned, but new ones started to form, fragile and trembling. Conversations were often short, sometimes awkward, but genuine. He learned to sit in silence with others, without feeling vulnerable or exposed. The weight of his secret lessened when shared, even in fragments. He was no longer alone in his burden. He was not the same man he had been, but perhaps he could become better. He could carry the past without letting it define his every breath. The radio's haunting frequencies had faded, replaced by a new kind of signal, the fragile hum of human connection and possibility. In the quiet moments before sleep, he often reached for the silver locket Maya left behind, the small, delicate piece that once felt like a chain binding him to the past. Now, it was a tether to truth and memory, a reminder that some wounds never fully close, but can become part of a larger story. A story of survival, sorrow, and fragile hope. The radio's silence was not the end, but a new beginning. The screams had ceased, but their echo lived on deep inside his heart, a quiet pulse that reminded him that truth, no matter how painful, was a kind of salvation. And in that knowing, he found a sliver of peace, not from forgetting, but from finally facing what had long been hidden in the static and shadows. Years had passed, yet the past lingered like a shadow etched deep within him. Sitting alone in a quiet cafe, the man traced the cool metal of the silver locket hidden beneath his shirt, a tether to a memory, both fragile and eternal. Outside, children's laughter echoed faintly from the bustling street, a sound both joyous and piercing. The radio that once tore through the night with cryptic numbers and screams was gone, replaced by the hum of daily life, but its echoes lived on in his mind. Maya was no longer a ghost or a scream in the static. She was a part of him, a memory he had learned to carry with quiet dignity. In a whispered breath, he said, "I'm still here." Not a victory cry, but a testament to survival in a world that had moved on without him. The world outside spun relentlessly forward, indifferent to the scars worn quietly beneath his calm exterior. But he found meaning in the smallest fragments of life. A fleeting smile from a stranger, the scent of rain lingering on pavement, an old song stirring a memory long buried. The screams had faded into whispers, transformed from cries of pain into murmurs of forgiveness and understanding. These delicate moments became his sanctuary, a refuge from the torment. Though the past still gripped his heart, he understood survival was not about conquering the past but enduring it, bearing the weight with courage, finding strength in the act of facing what could never be undone. The locket remained close, a fragile talisman, a connection to the girl he lost but never forgot. Inside, a faded photograph captured Maya's radiant smile, a moment frozen in time before the darkness took hold. Sometimes in quiet solitude, he whispered her name, not from pain or despair, but from love and remembrance. There was no grand redemption, no tidy ending waiting for him in the shadows of his past. Only the raw truth, knowing what was lost, what had been survived, and what could never be forgiven. And in that profound understanding, he discovered an unexpected peace, not from forgetting, but from remembering with open, unflinching eyes. One final breath, one last whisper that should never have been spoken, echoed faintly through the silence. The radio, long dormant and forgotten, crackled to life for a brief moment, not with numbers or screams, but a single word carried on the thin veil of static: remember. It was a command, a blessing, a curse entwined. The man closed his eyes, letting the weight of that word settle inside him like a stone sinking into a dark, slow-moving river. He knew this was no ending. Memory was endless, a shadow that would walk beside him for all his days. But now, he was no longer afraid. He was ready to carry it all. The love, the loss, the screams, in steadfast witness, quietly bearing the truth without flinching. It did not end with triumph or resolution. It ended with knowing what had been lost, Maya, innocence, silence, and knowing what had been endured, the unbearable burden of truth, the fragile hope born from pain, and knowing what could never be forgiven, the silence that allowed the darkness to grow, the choices made in shadows. The man exhaled slowly, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for years. The radio fell silent once more. Outside, the world continued, relentless and indifferent. But inside him, a soul found fragile peace, not from forgetting, but from facing. And with that, life went on, scarred but unbroken, moving quietly toward whatever dawn awaited.